Good morning. No answer. They've taken measures, Mr. Shevardnadze, Droni newspaper, Tamriko Kintsurashvili. I have two questions. You've been standing here all morning? He was a Democrat by nature. Some may find him overly tough, demanding, but he genuinely embodied democratic values. We can talk on end about personal freedom and generally a free country building on higher principles. But without free press and television, it's all fairy tales.
I
won't hold it against you, even if you discard of it altogether. Let's start. Give me some tea, please. Eka? Tea or something? No, I'll have some borjomi. Borjomi? Hungover? He appreciated pluralism. For example, you know what he told U.S. Ambassador Yalowitz after he presented his credentials? He said, just keep in mind that we have a whole array of opinions here. So please consider all forces. Listen to everyone's voice, because our people hold different ideas. But that's a good thing, isn't it? When you, drawing on pluralism, are not afraid to speak out against the opinions of others. Let's just talk, have a conversation here. Naturally, it will involve questions, but I want it to be a person-to-person conversation reflecting, among others, what catches your fancy. All right. Good evening. You're killing me. You can't come up with new topics now? And you can't really regrow my hair, can you? Without mincing my words, I always single out then a generation of journalists as the freest generation, free of all cliches and ready to fight tooth and nail for freedom of speech. This is the generation that formed under Shevardnadze. I can't argue that this generation would not have emerged if we didn't have him as president. My interviews with him were something unheard of, because today it's unimaginable to get to know the country's leaders, your interviewees up close and personal.
Nowadays,
you wait in a special media room. Then they show up, make an official statement, and you don't get to communicate with them at all. But he, the country's president, was so approachable. Besides regular weekly briefings, you could ask him any questions afterwards. And nobody would kill you, persecute you, or ban you from these briefings for your questions. And these questions were often quite uncomfortable, even on a personal level, sometimes even insulting. But Shevardnadze had the qualities that defined a leader. Mr. Shevardnadze, let's imagine that this main pipeline cannot be commissioned without Russia's engagement. What would be the prospects then? No, that's not what I said. They just twist your words and put them in your mouth. I'm really grateful to him, not just for the chances I was given by him as an interviewee. I'm talking about helping a journalist make a good interview, but also for this generation. Eka Choperia, Georgi Sanaya, Koko Kandiashvili, Dato Nicoradze, me, and many, many others. Anyone who's anybody in today's journalism is from that generation, nourished and matured in that period. One thing is clear, independent television and press is the main, paramount achievement in today's Georgia, the only thing that sets us apart from other countries. He never requested questions in advance or asked to remove sections he happened to dislike afterward. There were no sections like that. Why? He loved the challenge, to see if he could face up to trick questions. I am not surprised, not at all, to hear these questions from young journalists. Sometimes I try to guess what they may ask me to prepare in advance. Sometimes my guess is right, sometimes it isn't. I don't remember him ever losing his temper. He usually had substantiated answers. But if something rubbed him the wrong way, he had a habit of switching to jokes. It's better for one person, even the president, to back down than for Georgia to lose its ancient region of Abkhazia forever. Thank you, Irakli. My answer will be just as polite as yours. Mr. President, I'm sorry for interrupting, but your sense of humor, which I adore, has served you well in politics. It's good you're capping it off with a compliment. He never played down this talent of his. He never made overly familiar, uncalled for jokes. His jokes were always dead on, at the right time, in the right form. I don't know if you've noticed, but I stopped attending your press conference a while ago. I noticed it, I did. It's because of Vakhtang, my old friend. For some reason, he canceled my accreditation. Please tell Vakhtang that this is wrong. Vakhtang, this is wrong. He always tried to find the right answers to questions. If not, he twisted his wording around so as to convince journalists that their questions had been answered in full, except that they left unable to make heads or tails of what they had just heard. Shevardnadze was anything but nominal, titular. He was a very strong president, a formidable figure. Yes, we all know that he was not an easy person to deal with, but he had special relationships with journalists. We adored him. He was our older friend. Mr. Shevardnadze, you told us about your meeting and discussion with the World Bank, but you haven't told us about the IMF. But you never asked. Let me tell you one behind-the-scenes story. We journalists like to gather up and reminisce. With age, many memories become especially vivid, right? So almost all of our memories are linked to that period. Like, remember what Shevardnadze said, and then you told him this or that, and then I interviewed him, and he said this or that. That's the kind of man he was, and I really respect him for that. This doesn't apply to Rustave too. You go ahead now. Thank you so much. I know you, and I think I know these guys too. Well, if anything, they know me. All right, take care.
არა მხოლოდ მე, ჩვენს ძალიან ბევრ კოლეგას
It's not just my words. Many of our colleagues have said that we really cherished our freedom back then. The events that befell the media later made it abundantly clear how vital it was to let journalists enjoy freedom. Irakli and Tengiz, can you do me a favor? You know we agreed to wrap it up at 20 minutes past. Given that we're running out of time, can you go first, Irakli? That'll give you more time. Just make it snappy, please. Give Tengiz some time, too. All right, sir. Vakhtang assumes that my question may take more time than usual. Irakli, there's a meeting scheduled for 11:30, so we have to make it short. What can I do? Must have been born under a bad sign, Mr. Shevardnadze. Your questions are always so long. Why? Next one was supposed to be especially long, but I must concede to Vakhtang's demand. Seek, and ye shall find.
Ამიტომ მაინც შევეცდები მე ძალიან მოკლედ კონსტრუქციულად ჩამოაყალიბო ის რაც ერთხელ მოვიდა ერთი გერმანელი ბიჭია.
Once a young man from Germany showed up. He had an earring and a goatee, so we knew it was a man. But he turned out to be a journalist for some respectable newspaper. I reported to Shevardnadze. He said let him in for like 10 minutes. As the young man entered, Shevardnadze looked at him and changed his mind. Make it 5, he told me. But then this young man asked him some seriously meaningful questions. Usually journalists ask, what do you think? And how do you feel about this? No, this man was obviously deep in political processes, knowledgeable, with the right questions. For example, here's one. Did you mean to dissolve the Soviet Union? Or it just collapsed on you on its own? And many similar questions. 10 minutes later, I said, Mr. Shevardnadze, leave me alone, he replied, meaning that he was into it. It was clear from the get-go that if you gave him something run-of-the-mill, he would immediately disengage. Of course, you had to make sure to keep drumming up his interest. And my last question, Mr. Shevardnadze, what's your gut feeling? You're sure taking your time, aren't you? I apologize for... Don't worry about it. In later years, I became his personal photographer, and we had these cues. For example, I'm taking pictures for a while, and then he gives me this look, and I know that it's time to wrap it up. I grab my camera and leave. Nowadays, politicians love posing for pictures. Come on, let's put that camera to work. He never said anything of that kind. He may not have been too excited about taking pictures, but he never refused, knowing that it would put me in an awkward position. Even during tense talks with Yeltsin or Grachiev, he never actually told me to stop. He only gave me the look, and it was all clear to me. Okay, Sergo, that's enough. Would you take a joint step by attending a soccer game in a casual setting, without a tie, and inviting Russian President Putin to join you? Especially since you're both avid soccer fans. And the last informal part of this question. Without a tie? You mean in boxers?
I
remember one of his briefings. I was still a reporter back then. I didn't have my own show at the time. So I rose to my feet and asked him, Mr. Shevardnadze, you know that the Pardon Commission, and right there I got names mixed up. And instead of Risma Gordeziani, I said, and Mr. Mindia Ugrachelidze plans to talk to you about Jaba Iosiliani's possible release. What can you tell us? He was sort of caught off guard, but then he gave me this look and... Now, Mindia Ugrachelidze and I are friends, but this is not an issue to be decided on a friendly level. As for our functions, Mr. Ugrachelidze serves his own functions, and I have mine, totally different. And suddenly it dawns on me as I'm standing there on the platform, why Mindya Ugrachhelidze, realizing that it was my mistake in the first place. As the president continues talking about Mindya Ugrachhelidze, I cut him off. I'm sorry, Mr. President. I meant Rismag Gordeziani. I'm sorry, my mistake. We mentioned Mindya Ugrachhelidze so many times, but it's Rismag Gordeziani who plans to pardon Jabba. You should have stopped me earlier. I'm wasting my breath here. During the council's meeting, I often sat there at the farthest table, all alone, sad and pitiful. But he always found kind words for me. Something cheerful like, now Maya will sit down, listen to us, and then write who knows what about us. Something like this, as though saying, you belong, and you're one of us. It was very big of him. I'm sure Inga has a question about Mindya Ugrachhelidze. No, this time it's about Otar Khupenia, I promise. A Georgian correspondent for Reuters calls me at 7:30 in the morning. Mr. Sakvaralidze, I need to schedule a meeting with Mr. Shevardnadze. Reagan is gravely ill, so Reuters wants us to get in touch with everyone whose words about Reagan would carry weight, and to interview them, so that we can have interviews ready in case something bad happens. I called Shevardnadze an hour later. You know what time it is? Yes, but... All right, bring her over. He was very surprised when we showed up in the studio at the IMEL building 15 minutes later. Are you going to ask questions? No, you do the talking. Anything you want to say about Reagan, the reporter replied.
Absolutურად ახალი მოულოდნელი ამბავი იყო, ხო, მისთვის და რაღაც 15 წუთში უკვე შევედით იმელშიც იყო სტუდიის ოთახი. რამეს მკითხავთ თუ არა, თქვენ თვითონ აი რაც რეიგანზე გეთქმითო რა. ეხლა ვერ გავიხსენებ.
I don't remember what exactly he said. It's been so many years. But even my impressions aside, he sounded somewhat unconvincing. He painted the magnitude of Reagan's personality in just a couple of strokes, and that was it. Silence. But the girl seemed impressed, stunned. She said, Mr. Shevardnadze, I just received interviews with Genscher and others, but none of them comes even close to your words. What a brilliant interview. Edward looked at her and then asked, all right, but we might be on the horns of a dilemma here. What do you mean, Mr. Shevardnadze? What if he doesn't die?
ჩანაწერი გააკეთეთ. უყურებს კი, მაგრამ რა გვეშველება ახლა? რაზე ბატონო, რო არ გარდაიცვალოს?
One more question, if I may. Please answer in Russian. No. His way of life was anything but ordinary, far more difficult and harder than the lives of ordinary people. And I know what I'm talking about. But at the same time, he was just a human being with everyday human relationships and needs, right? After hours during our visits abroad, we couldn't wait to tie up any loose ends, send out all necessary materials, and go out for at least for a while. When would the Shevardnadze do in the meantime? He wraps up his long day, goes back to the hotel, all alone in his room. I felt sorry for him as a human being. His life was all about thinking about and working on the country's problems day and night. This was his life, very hard and very different from the lives of ordinary folk. I've gotten accustomed to insults and offenses. I'm used to being called names left and right. Fairly or not, people do it regardless. But I believe that if we are to become a democracy, we must cover this path too. And if someone must suffer more than anyone else, it must be the president of Georgia. It's all for the better. Familiarizing yourself with free media outlets is the best way to judge the effectiveness of reforms. Europeans often tell us that all they do is go to the nearest newsstand, grab the papers, and ask the interpreter to translate what they read. They visited several newsstands with a whole array of papers displayed. To our surprise, none of them called for supporting the president of Georgia.
Quite true, quite true. Absolutely true. Absolutely true, yes. I made a special point of going into the streets to look at the newspapers on the newsstand. And I insisted that the interpreter translate all the front pages. It is clearly a very vigorous press. Thank you very much.
We learned it from you. Better still, there was political satire. There was Dardubala, an animated series which Eduard Shevardnadze, understandably, disliked. Nobody likes stuff like that. It seemed especially annoying to his entourage, but I often heard him say, "Now they wouldn't have the guts to do this to someone else, would they?" Well, you know who he meant by someone else, don't you? He meant the leaders of neighboring countries who ran totally different political systems. They wouldn't have the guts. And then he would add, "That's our greatest achievement." If what we have here is not freedom of speech, then I don't know what is. Here you have journalists following me around, and no one has ever heard them complain that something didn't get published, or something was banned. Many of my friends tell me, "You've got to tighten your grip on things. You can't let it slide. There must be some order, some law and order." Not that I want you to think that I'm in favor of tightening my grip on the press. Not at all, especially with elections around the corner.
I believe
that the reason behind Georgia's current development in terms of democracy, pluralism, and freedom of speech lies in the fact that it never built on an attempt to establish an authoritarian rule, despite it having been suggested more than once. Better still, there were some wannabe humanitarian celebrities, most of them are dead, God rest their souls, who really pushed for it. They kept nagging Shevardnadze to monopolize power, but he absolutely refused to do it. Why? You think he couldn't? Yes, he could. Why? He didn't know how to do it? I'm sure he did. I'm working hard on making sure that Georgia feels genuinely independent. To know that, if not tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, at least in a couple years' time, every Georgian will live a normal life in a free and independent country. That's what I'm thinking about, not who said what and when. Not that I'm totally oblivious to everything else, though. I won't lie to you. He had a strong sense of responsibility, explaining why he took things to heart, especially rumors. The rumor mill is the only perfectly streamlined, up-and-running industry in Georgia. One of the more absurd rumors suggested that we ran a big, giant hazelnut business.
Hazelnut deal with Mrs. Clinton's brothers come up in any way?
Did the issue of hazelnuts surface in your meeting with Mr. Clinton? There were hazelnut snacks somewhere, yes. Georgian hazelnuts? Yes. I don't recall a single visit abroad when his plane was not packed with journalists. Aboard the plane, he spoiled us rotten. He would make rounds to greet everyone in person and make sure we were all set. I'm telling you, his social skills were something unique. It may look like no big deal, just a gesture. But besides those of us who saw him in a positive light, there were also journalists specifically instructed to find fault with him. There's also a second floor, right? Cut it out. What's the matter with you? Breakfast is on its way, and then there's also lunch. What would we do without you?
ერთიმაში ვიყავით ჩვენ უკრაინაში ოფიციალური ვიზიტით. იქ, ნუ ახლა ყველა წავედით ჩვენ საქმეებზე.
We were on an official visit to Ukraine. We had all our assignments to take care of. With all necessary agreements signed, we were flying back to Tbilisi. Before landing, he had a habit of asking who signed what. So we entered his private cabin. He spoke in a low voice, and we couldn't hear him with the engines raving in the background. Mr. Shevardnadze, can you speak louder, please? We asked him. We had to hear what he had to say, right? Let's get the chief pilot here, he suggested. Something he'd never done before. The pilot, scared out of his wits, entered, and Shevardnadze said, "I'm about to have a meeting here, so why don't you turn the engines off for like 30 minutes? The pilot froze for a second and then darted out. Mr. Shevardnadze then turned to us and said, "Go get him. I think he's about to kill the engines." Are you happy? Are you? Very. Because big things are about to unfold. Big things. If we do everything right. Dato, you have any snacks on you? Yes. They ate so much horse meat yesterday that we're about to start neighing. That would be nice to hear, by the way. He knew better than anyone else that every time we boarded a plane, we were targeted. Anywhere under 3,000 meters, we were easy prey for Stinger or Strela missiles designed to hit low-altitude targets. He treated us to cognac or whiskey, the only thing available to cheer us up under the circumstances. I remember we were flying to Istanbul around Easter. The plane takes off, and then we learn that surface-to-air missiles were stolen from one of the military bases while we were on our way to the airport in Tbilisi. It's a very important visit related to Baku-Ceyhan issues, so he decides against turning back. We're still in midair, able to enjoy a bird's-eye view of the city as something hits our plane, a major impact. I can't even begin to describe the chaos it caused aboard. Things, luggage falling on the floor, and all that. The lights went off. The cabin started smelling of burning plastic. The engines went off. The plane started descending in a free fall. All I could think about was that we got hit by some bomb or missile, because it was Air Force One, after all. Once you're aboard, you should be ready for anything. I looked around the cabin and noticed the expressions on the faces of ministers and journalists, and I got scared too. What happened to our plane felt like a scene from a movie. And then I realized why those Strela missiles were stolen. Mission accomplished. As the pilots explained to us later, it's called ball lightning, a phenomena to be included in many aviation textbooks. It happens very rarely, if ever. Our case may have been the first ever. At any rate, it hit the plane right in the propeller and bounced back. The propeller prevented it from penetrating the cabin. I don't know what the odds of survival are in a situation like this, but I remember Babu walking up to us, radiating tranquility as usual, and saying with a smile on his face, "Guys, did you get scared or what?" We're barely standing on our feet, but you're not tired at all. Where do you draw all this energy? The fact that you're barely standing on your feet is a very source of my energy. He is said to have been fearless. In fact, he knew no fear at all, or he never showed his fear. At any rate, I never noticed any signs of fear in his face or behavior. It's been very exciting, Mr. Shevardnadze. We were hosted by the President of Georgia. One hour and 5 minutes in all. Wow, that window is not open? Somebody open it, please. I must see the Trinity Cathedral behind Eka. I usually make the sign of the cross and pray. God, let me live to see this church completed. Nothing like it has been built in Georgia in centuries. There are multitudes of sinners in every era. Especially numerous are the sins committed during the so-called years of totalitarianism. We are building this church to atone for these sins, those of both today's and yesterday's generations. This is also about the immortalization of our history and a vision of the future. Commendably, this large-scale construction launches on the day of the enthronement of His Holiness. We arrived without giving fair warning to the Patriarch. The dome was about to be finalized, with scaffolding surrounding it. He said he wanted to beat his security guards to the top, so he ascended the ladder in one breath. He was bursting with joy. Later, the Patriarch chided him. "Next time, let me know you're coming. I want to greet you up here." I believe that we are together in building this monument of the century and the millennium, and in doing so, we emphasize that Georgia is immortal as long as it believes, acts accordingly, and turns to God. And all this is tied to your name. You and I have set a classic example of how the church and the state can be independent without interfering with each other's affairs, one of the most difficult, long-standing problems. I am happy that we have succeeded, and I am proud to have made my modest contribution in company with you. Principles regulating the relations between the state and church will be signed at the Shevardnadze and Cathedral. This document is of historic importance. In fact, it is the most important document, second only to the Constitution. And Mr. Shevardnadze has made a tremendous contribution to its development.
Eduard Shevardnadze.
I am happy and excited to be hosting the President of Georgia. Prior to his arrival, we were informed that the leader of an Orthodox Christian country was about to visit us. Now he is leaving us as our Orthodox Christian brother, who will always be commemorated in this monastery. If, until now, we had a close spiritual friend in Georgia's Catholicos Patriarch Ilya II, now we have a new spiritual brother and friend, President of Georgia, Mr. Eduard Shevardnadze. May the grace of the holy relics of the Mount Athos monasteries, the Virgin Mary herself, and the founding sponsors of the Ivaron Monastery be with Georgia, with Mr. President, to be strong, so that our brothers, the Georgian nation, may be edified and reinforced, so that we may grow stronger through our interaction. When you see someone working day and night, working himself to the bone, so to speak, you have no moral right but to do the same. Why the President of Georgia has no right to call in his minister at 3 in the morning? I'm working here, and they're sleeping. He worked very hard, unimaginably hard for his age. We can take 10 if you want, or we can keep going. I'm not tired. He worked on documents a lot, especially during the day. In the morning, he read the papers to keep an eye on global processes. As you know, in November 1999, we implemented, can we press on a little longer without a break? I work harder than anyone else. Nobody's forcing you, isn't it what you say? On the day celebrating the 10th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall, 6 foreign ministers met in the 2+4 format, and I think it was the only event bringing together all 6. And it was after these talks that Shevardnadze was invited to participate in the most popular television show. It was 2000. Georgia was going through a rough patch. Shevardnadze told us, I can't just hop on a plane for Germany. It was a major blow to the TV show's management. They told me, we'll do everything, anything in the world, just to have him here for a couple of hours. They sent a charter plane from Niki Lauda's airlines just to deliver him. Shevardnadze agreed on one condition. He would arrive in the morning and leave in the evening without staying overnight. Mr. President, I'm so happy to see you. Mr. President. How much weight did you lose? He who works puts on weight, and he who doesn't loses it. There was so much excitement that I felt like a reunion of college buddies after a long summer break. All right, but can you speak in a language that every educated person understands? Of course, we'll continue in German. After arrival, he was taken into a dressing room to apply makeup. He kept laughing and joking, charming everyone around him with his sense of humor. You look amazing.
Ist da auch frei?
Ja,
Bitte. Michael.
Muss eigentlich nicht sein.
No, don't touch. Don't touch, there's only 2 left.
He must have carried this atmosphere into the show. In a nutshell, they had a nice conversation, reminiscing about the thaw in the relationship between Genscher and Shevardnadze, when the latter invited the former to his house for the first time. Thank you. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. Mr. Shevardnadze, your final thoughts, please. Yours is one of the most popular television stations, and you are a top-ranking host. And I have a favor to ask. Please invite us back for the 20th anniversary of Germany's reunification. Yes, That'll give your makeup artist a run for their money, but by then they'll be far more advanced.
Dürfen Sie uns gerne alle wieder einladen. Das wird dann
Deal.
Wir kriegen das schon durch. Kann mir mal jemand kurz helfen hier?
That's how our negotiations unfolded.
We went fishing, and we both caught a tiny little fish.
Thank you very much.
Tell him I said take care of them.
How big were human factors in these human relationships? And when do human factors come into play? When these close relations evolve into a friendship between families. He used to admit to feeling at home when visiting them. He was really close to the Schultz family, too.
Great to see you here.
I've heard a great deal about you.
And this is
Is it all true?
And you are being honored by the IDI. And this is IDI here in front of you.
By the way, Schultz presented him with another award for democracy in Israel.
I'd like to ask George if you can present President Shevardnadze with a medal